As Dr. Ramirez mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Dr. William Mattingly has developed COVID, so I am here to present these on his behalf. And in this presentation, we're going to talk about your data collection form and your study database. So the data collection form and study database, these are both going to be still elements that are inside our protocol that we're going to describe and develop. And they're still, of course, inside our planning stage. But then we will be using the database when we actually are performing the study. We'll be using our data collection forms at that point in time. And also when we analyze our data. So we're going to be using it many different times. So there's an importance in having a good data collection form in that when we think of the variables that we've defined for our study and the information we're collecting, we want to make sure that we are collecting things that are pertinent to our research question and our study hypotheses. And we also want to make sure that we're not collecting too much information and we're not collecting too little information. And then we will be essentially guiding our data collection form based on our study protocol. So we need to include our primary and secondary objectives. So of course, we need to make sure that we're going to be collecting our primary outcome because otherwise we can't actually analyze the study. So data that would be nice to know, such as something that's ancillary to the study, generally should be excluded unless you are planning on doing ancillary studies afterwards. So if you don't plan on studying costs for patients, don't collect information on costs because that may be difficult to collect. And then your data collection form can be either paper-based or electronic. So when we look at the data collection form, as Dr. Ramirez said earlier, it's the sort of outside face of our study database. And there's the concept of garbage in, garbage out. So if your data collection form is bad, ultimately that will mean your study database will be bad, and then your data analysis and results will be bad. So you want to make sure that your data collection form is well defined and presented in a way that's easy to collect information. And so as data is primary output of a clinical study, the quality of our study is going to be dependent on the quality of the data that we obtain. And there are many different types of databases. So a long time ago, Dr. Ramirez's group had the Community-Acquired Pneumonia Organization study, the CAPO study, and that started in an Access database in the early 2000s. And then eventually, through many iterations, landed now in REDCap. And REDCap, there's many other database studies, but I'm going to highlight REDCap a lot because REDCap has many features that I think are hallmarks of a good database. And so some history on REDCap. REDCap was developed by Vanderbilt in 2004. It was funded by an NIH grant. And the goal of REDCap was to create a database for researchers by researchers. So everything about this is designed to facilitate data collection and make it easier. The other important note is that REDCap is HIPAA compliant. So it is an online database, but you can make sure that there is protection for your patient's information inside that as well. And so REDCap is free to use for universities and nonprofits. So you don't have to pay for it. I've been involved in studies where they've had $2 million databases designed in other systems, and they were slower and clunkier and worse. So I'm a strong advocate for REDCap. And then some of the components of REDCap, and in my opinion, components of a good database, are listed here, and we're going to discuss all of these. So the first thing that we're considering, and this is going to be kind of hard for you all to see, so I apologize. But on the right here, we have the electronic case report form. And so this is going to be analogous to our paper case report form. So in REDCap, you can design a case report form that's going to look a lot like your paper case report form if you've drafted one as part of your protocol. And so ideally, you can actually set up case report forms into multiple sections that are unique to each other. And so you can use that to facilitate research. So for example, you could put all of your lab values in one form. You could put all of your patient history in another form. You could put all of your outcomes in a third form. So that way you have multiple pieces and it's not just one long document that, like having separate pages on your data collection form, you have separate digital pages, so to speak. And then the important thing to note is that your collection form should always, again, be guided by your study protocol. And you want to make sure that you're collecting all of the data points you need for your statistical analysis. Another feature that REDCap has that is exceptionally important is data quality features. So REDCap has querying and monitoring. So this is a screenshot of what the default queries are for REDCap. And you can actually specify your own custom queries. So let's say that you are calculating a score like the Charleston Comorbidity Index. You can have a query to then say, where is it missing? Who is missing these pieces to make sure that you are calculating it correctly. And I think these slides are automatically advancing, so I apologize. You can also set up reports to run based on things that you specify. And so when you want to have a list of who are all the patients with COPD in your data, you can use REDCap to easily generate those reports. REDCap also logs all of your data, so you can track who has entered data, who's accessed it, who's changed it, who's designed the database, who has exported the database. Essentially, if anyone has ever touched it, it's logged. And it's also time-stamped. So it's an incredible feature for control of your database. There's also user security, which goes along with the logging. So in an Excel file, let's say that you have a Google Documents or Google Sheets where you have 5 people collecting data at one time. That can become a huge mess if you ever have conflicts of people entering on the same patient at the same time or things like that. So REDCap actually has individual logins for each of the users at an institution. And you can also customize the access for each user as well. So you can say, I don't want this user to be able to edit this form. And so that allows you to then modify who can access what and how they can access it. So there's a great deal of control you can have over the users that are logged in. There's also data access groups. So you can use REDCap for a multi-site study very easily. You just would assign a data access group to each site. And what that does is it protects your site's information from another site's information. So if you associate a user with the data access group, that means that they'll only be able to see cases that are entered by that data access group. So there's lots of different ways that you can control how data is accessed from the database as well. And then when we talk about just entering data, there are quality measures that you can implement that are, if you think of Excel, sort of the cell validation, you can do that in REDCap very easily as well. And so one of the things that's really important is consistency. So for example, date types. In Excel, you could type dates however you want, and then oftentimes it'll recognize it as a date. But when it comes to analysis, that becomes very obnoxious because then you have to kind of manually go in and change each date. So if anything, REDCap is wonderful just for making dates uniform and consistent. So I love it for that. You could also set up branching logic. So if you have questions about, say, a patient's progression of diabetes, you can have those trigger only if you say, does the patient have diabetes, yes or no? So there's lots of different options that you have for controlling and setting up and standardizing your database. And then you can also have validation, so that way if there are fields which are out of range, it'll pop up a little warning message saying, hey, this looks like an outlier, please check to make sure. And there's also commenting features where you can comment and say, yes, this data is correct. And then no database would be finished without a data dictionary. So REDCap allows easy export. Once you've built your database, it's actually just a click away. They build it for you as you're building your database. And so you can share it either as a PDF, which will have the information needed, or you can share it as an Excel file. And that Excel file has all the metadata, so the structure that you've put on your variables. And then someone else, actually, if they have that Excel file, they could also upload that into a new REDCap project and sort of create from a structure standpoint, a clone of your database. So it is very useful for sharing potential study design as well that way. And REDCap also allows downloading and exporting of data for many different forms. So you can download it just as a CSV file or an Excel file, and pretty much every major statistical software you can download and export it in and be ready for analysis. And so there are advantages there because then it will do the recoding for you. So that allows you to just have you could circumvent the data dictionary potentially, even if you export it into, say, R using their script. And so REDCap also, since it is a electronic CRF and electronic database system, it's on a secure remote server. So that is how it can maintain HIPAA compliance. And investigators can gather data remotely. So let's say that you have that multi-center trial again, then multiple people can be logged in at the same time, entering at multiple locations in the world. So you can have lots of different connections and not have data conflicts that way. And then REDCap is easy to set up. So anyone who is in a nonprofit or university can essentially contact Project REDCap to join the REDCap consortium. And then you'll be given access to, a mailing list. There's a community of people who kind of discuss research in REDCap. So there's support involved. And there's lots of, documentation. And you can actually get the tools to set up REDCap yourself from that REDCap consortium, either in Linux or Windows. So that is the conclusion of this. As I said, I love REDCap. If you are doing research, I strongly suggest you use it too, because it'll make your life a lot easier. And with that, we'll hand it over to Dr. Weiss to talk about, Dr. Wild, excuse me.